Welcome everybody. Welcome in the studio. Welcome to my distinguished and very experienced and, basically global travelers and guests at the table. Today we're going to talk about a very nice topic, a little bit abstract, but hopefully we can make it more practical today, because it's about how data and AI can have a system impact in terms of economy, in terms of mindset with people, and those kind of things. Normally, to introduce speakers, you can do it pretty short. But in this case, I'm afraid I need a little bit more time, especially you, Daniel. I managed to reduce it to this, but I could talk half an hour to introduce you. What have you done? And basically, the same counts for Geert-Jan van Zanden on my right side. The funny thing is. Geert-Jan, born in the Netherlands, but for the last 35 years you lived not in this country, and you lived basically in Asia, but also in Spain and all over the globe. And Daniel was born in South Africa, and for the same period he lives in the Netherlands. So it's but traveling the world. Before I start, if somebody has a question and wants to interrupt or whatever, that is possible. It's fine with me. Raise your hand and we'll try to bring your question at the table. So don't be hesitant. If it is one question, not three of them at the same person, I would say, but to make it a nice conversation. Geert-Jan, you're a frequent speaker about transitional management kind of issues. Basically, sustainability transition, sustainability governance. How do you handle if you have sustainability ambitions? The previous talk was about setting moral ambitions and ambitions. How do we shape this and govern this for larger global companies? You wrote a book about transformation of critical systems. I need to read some of this. You're busy with systemic change in energy, food, water, finances, many different companies. Same counts for you, Daniel. Many different sectors. And you live in Bangkok. Happily still? Is it too warm these days?
It's getting warmer. Huh?
Yeah?
It's everywhere, yeah. But happy.
Okay. Well, basically what you're trying to do, you try to equip future leaders and to make current leaders future fit. I think that's basically the small conclusion of what we try to describe here. Daniel, basically you try to align visions of people, and you interviewed a lot of leaders in the past. I've seen I think at least 200 interviews you did with global leaders, at least 1 or 2 hours apiece. Yeah, long time.
Pretty much 1,000.
Including the sushi maker of the Japanese emperor. Yeah, so there was about quality, if I remember
Learning.
Oh, learning.
How do you get to be at that level without a university?
The funny thing is, this was the only interview this guy gave in his life. So, to this guy. So funny. That's what I recall. 30 years in the Netherlands, but basically, how often are you in the Netherlands?
I spend a lot of time flying around, yeah.
Yeah, that's basically, you'll find this guy or on a plane or in the car or in a cafe or whatever, at least, with a laptop somewhere. Huh? I met you, I think, about 20 years ago already, and you were busy with something new, and you called it News Console. You tried to assemble data, all kinds of things, and you tried to scrape open sources. Public sources all over the globe. This was AI avant la lettre at the time, and you built a system. Your databases are based in South Africa still?
Oh, here, Amsterdam.
Here. Okay. By that time, your development team at least was in South Africa. And by now, you developed ClimateGTP, which was based on that model. How big is ClimateGTP in terms of data set?
So it's there's a family of models there, and it's the second foundational model to come out of Europe. So foundational model, I don't know if anybody's aware.
What is a foundational model?
Yeah. So it's when you're training from scratch. You're not building something on top of ChatGPT or on top of one of the models, but you're really training it from scratch, from your own tokens. And we're in the fortunate position that we have billions of articles. Every day we process about a bit over 250 million URLs. And so we have vast collections, and we're really the last independent corpora that exists in the world. And so when we looked at our corpora, we said, well, what is the one AI we should be building? And not a general purpose, but a task-specific AI. And we said that the challenge ahead really is climate change. So it's open source, it's there freely available. It's around 300 billion tokens, so it's about the size of Bloomberg GPT. And there are a family of models from 7 to 13 to 70 billion parameter models, which are there. And we've sponsored access to it. So it's freely, openly available. If you apply for it, you can get access to that. And the intent of that is to use AI not as our new gods or a new AGI, but really to transform how we can get access to climate intelligence, climate insights, cascade effects of extreme weather events, new policy initiatives, make it easier to do ESG filings.
You're already diving to the content part. I'm trying to introduce you a little bit. You've done scenario thinking for, among others, Shell, but also bigger banks, insurance companies on the global scale. All data-driven in most cases. So that's something. And you also worked on the column, the economy of ideas,
yes.
Which intrigued me. What was that about?
So in the 90s, the big question was, what is coming here? And so wrote a column, The Economy of Ideas, which was distributed globally, and then later on the Information Society column in the Financial Times Review. Yeah.
All right. We have very much a lot of things to do and little time today. So, Geert-Jan, to start with you, you mentioned in the pre-talk that you work on reaching sustainability development goals is a complex thing, and it's a complex thing for especially companies and also for other organizations. So you need to have a sort of radical redesign of how these kind of things should be achieved. How should that look like?
Yeah, maybe to give a little bit more context. So,
yeah.
You know, we have the SDGs, 17 SDGs with very specific targets.
SDG is Sustainable Development Goals, yeah.
And each of those targets has a number of pretty specific targets attached to them, and we're not reaching most of them. Only 15% of those targets are on track to be reached. Most of them are standing still or even going backwards. So I think the conclusion that we can draw is that our current approach to changing the world around us is not really working. At least it should be reconsidered.
Yeah.
Right. And I think part of the problem is that we are approaching it through imposing standards, imposing reporting requirements, where we connect with data.
But ESG, well, we'll come to that a little later, but ESG reporting, is that the way to go, or?
Well, so my conclusion is that, and I take from the theory of systems change. This is a theory that's been developed over the last 50 years or so. When you try to change systems and you try to do that through imposing a tax here or a subsidy here or imposing a standard, that is a very weak way of changing a system. That's not good. Imagine if we have an economic system where, as today in most cases, where most of the new wealth created flows to the rich people. You can increase taxes a little bit to them, but it's not going to change the system.
Yeah,
the wealth will continue to flow to the rich people, and I can give you more examples like that. So we need to look for more radical, and radical in the sense of the root causes of those problems. We need to radically redesign some of these systems that we have built around us, the food system, the mobility system, the energy system. Most of those systems were created with a mindset that most of the leaders were taught in most of the company. In the 1970s, you had Milton Friedman. He was being taught to business school students, and Milton Friedman said, the purpose of business is business. So the social purpose of business is to make money. Well, and it sounded really nice, so most people believed that, and most of the business leaders of today were programmed that way.
Yeah,
and they created systems that are very efficient economically, but very inefficient in terms of natural capital or social capital. We have perverse economic growth at the moment. We're destroying natural capital to grow economically.
Yeah, and still it's being taught in that way. I mean, you've been teaching at MBA schools and universities throughout, and it's still an Anglo-Saxon kind of approach to how these programs are designed. So that needs to change.
That needs to change.
And how do you change these kind of things then?
Yeah, so I worked in let's say the real economy for most of my life. Last 10 years in a sustainability advisory firm on leadership development. But I felt that we need to start at the root. So I made a transition to academia. I started working with business schools. I'm a visiting professor in Bangkok, but I teach at various schools. Because if we can start to program our future leaders in a different way, they will take different decisions.
And you have been traveling the world, you have worked for many global companies, and you lived for a long time now in Asia. Is the mentality of the mindset of the Asian business leader different than from the European one?
It is. It is, and at a number of levels. There's, I think, a very important thing to keep in mind is that most of Asia, so most of the consumption in the world, which is causing the impact, the footprint, is happening in the West. And we're rich economies, we consume.
Yeah, we are consuming a lot.
We're consumers.
Yeah.
But we have moved most of our production to the developing world. And now we're telling the developing world to change the way they produce. Right? But what you see is that in Asia, for instance, most of our supply chains are based in Asia. So the mentality there is very much one of compliance. They're very good at complying with the regulations that
we imply
that the big multinationals that are based here impose. That's one very different mindset, because in sustainability you can have a compliance mindset where you say, I need to follow the rules, otherwise I get a fine. But if you have that mentality, sustainability transition is going to be a cost to you, right? Because then you have to install ways to clean your wastewater or take measures to deal with your waste.
Yeah, and from a European or a Western point of view, and that probably you can also answer this, Daniel. ESG reporting is one way of handling, to make your so-called supply chain a little bit more transparent. Mm-hmm. Is this the way to go, or are we ending up with what you call it? I believe in our pre-talk, sort of you end up in a rabbit hole of information and reporting. Is this ESG reporting? Is it the way forward? Is it only window dressing, or should we do something different, or is it well?
Well, I think, in building ClimateGTP, our focus was to make it easier for the compliance side. For better or for worse, in Europe, we have carbon border adjustment tax coming. And so for a long time, the idea was to match your point on production and consumption, is to start to introduce what are the cost of carbon in producing things, and therefore upstream, you have different incentive structures which are creating lower carbon production on that. And so that being said, so there are real places for compliance, for regulation, for these things there. And we have that coming whether we like it. It's past the European Council, so it's done. And it'll cascade through scope 1. So every business in this room will start to have to answer for how much carbon every euro produces, and then pretty soon for the immediate scope 2, and then by scope 3 it's the entire supply chains, and that'll have a yearly introduction going ahead. So we're already in that world. The question is, can we use our actions in terms of compliance to enable system-wide change? And I was at Climate Week last week in New York, and sitting around some of the biggest supply chains on earth in the discussion. So Chatham House rules. But one of those questions was, some of the people were very proud at getting the metal out of the labels of products, which makes it compliant to California regulation, which makes it more recyclable, et cetera, et cetera. And then, I raise the question is like, how are we going to do business in a 1.5 degree plus world? And the entire room got very silent. So, these are $1 trillion companies, and nobody really has an answer for that. So whether we like to or not, we are going to have system-wide change. And it'll be much more than getting the metal out of a label. It'll be how companies interact with each other and how they do it. And our goal here is to make those decisions as easy to understand at the scale of millions of people.
Yeah, and that's ClimateGTP, for example.
I would love to build on that in terms of is the ESG route that we're taking, is that the useful one at the moment? I'm very critical of the rabbit hole that we're going down, the ESG rabbit hole, for two reasons. One is it's incredibly expensive, the reporting requirements. I was with a professor from the Copenhagen Business School some time ago, and he had done a back of the envelope calculation that just on reporting and validation of our ESG data, the world is going to spend $500 billion per year.
He can help with that, but even then, what is the impact?
We would like to earn a bit of that.
There might be a business opportunity, right? But it is ridiculous to think that we would be spending $500 billion per year just on reporting. At the moment, we're spending about $2 trillion worldwide on the transition. So a quarter that we're going to reporting, that doesn't make a lot of sense. The other one is that ESG is designed it's especially designed for existing business models to fine-tune what they're doing, right? To make marginal improvements in what they're doing, and that's not going to get us to the desired state that we need to be. Now we're running behind dramatically on climate change or on the climate transition.
Yeah, right? At least on the goals we
dramatically, right?
Yeah.
So we don't need a system that pushes us towards making marginal innovations. We need to incentivize rethinking of how do we satisfy some. The people need nutrition. The current system, we lose 30+ % of our food. Most of the poverty in the world is concentrated in agriculture. There's so much wrong with that system. We can redesign that, and that's where we should set up the conditions and incentivize redesign of systems rather than tweaking of legacy systems.
Okay, but then it's the mindset. It's probably not focusing on the reporting only, but the system change. We need to, is it teachable? How do you get to the next level? If you want to, do you need a lot of data to support these kind of things? Because otherwise, then it's the next climate summit. That's the next ESG whatever. What makes us that we think that we can tweak it, or this is it?
Yeah. So if you look at the systems theory that has been developed over the decades, right? It basically teaches you that there are different levels in which you can intervene, in which you can change a system. One is what I mentioned in the parameters of a system, where you say, I'll put a tax here and a subsidy there. That's a very weak way of changing a system, as I explained before. A better way is to intervene at the design level of the system in terms of how many people are actually involved and have a voice in designing this system. And how many people have access to the information about how the system works. And this is quite conceptual, everything that I explained, right? But the most powerful way of changing a system is changing the mindset or the paradigms behind that underlie the design of the system. Right? So we used to have the mindset that everything needs to be economically as efficient and cheap as possible. We're starting to realize that that's getting us into a mess. So maybe that paradigm needs to change, and that's what leaders need to be programmed with. Right?
Yeah, because the whole event we are organizing is about circular economy. It's about how tech can contribute to these kind of changes. But on the other side, system change. If Friedman, at least he said, there's a sort of incentive. You make a lot of money. What are the incentives we can if you want to change your mindset? What what makes people do it? I mean, what is the incentive for people that's only talking about a better world? It apparently is not good enough or doesn't help enough. I mean, look at this. Yeah, we are all here, but look at what people vote in the Netherlands, what people vote in other countries. Like climate is not the first thing they are worried about these days.
No.
So what is the incentive we are looking for?
Well,
I think one needs to cascade that kind of incentive discussion there. And like everything, it's a little bit carrot and a little bit stick. Regulation is coming. There's going to be compliance. There's going to be a tax on that. But the broader principles are very clear that producing something with coal is going to be more expensive than producing something with solar power. And it already is so. We have some of that externalities, but even on the base price. And people forget, to come back to your earlier point about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We used to have the Millennium Development Goals. And we didn't think that we'd ever meet them. But we did. We exceeded them before the millennium, and largely, to be honest, because of China's ascendance and because of Indian ascendance, by the hundreds of millions, people got out of abject poverty, and the rate of poverty in the world is halved. So there is significant improvement in the world. I think given the challenges, we kind of forget that. That's one. Two is, green energy, renewable energy now is by far the cheapest source of energy. Last year, we built 400 gigawatts of photovoltaic capacity and a bit over 200 gigawatts of wind. That's equivalent to 400 nuclear power stations when the sun is shining. We can barely get one, and I'm shocked that the cabinet here is looking at building maybe one, maybe in a decade, when last year across the world 400 was built, and many of them when the sun is shining. And you might say, well, we have these problems of intermittency, but in California, I was meeting with people who were building a 300 gigawatt hour thermal storage unit, which is built by concrete. So these technologies are easy within our realm. And you can say, and you can take an Enlightenment view, which is different from a social political view, saying that some of those problems are access to solutions. We don't know what the solutions are. We don't understand how they scale at systems. We don't connect those things. And so here AI can help, because it can expose us to say, you might not know it, but the problem you're working on has been solved there. You might not know about it, but these people have de-risked about it. You might not know about it, but your brewery can produce the CO2 that goes into the Coca-Cola bottles. I'm just giving an example here. And there's a whole industrial ecology. And through those better insights and better understanding and economic structures around them, I think we get much closer to, and it's not the panacea, it will not make every marriage wonderful and every childhood roses, but it will start to move us in a very, very different direction than we have now. So we've had the fastest technology adoption that we've had in the history of humanity.
Yeah.
And so this technology can fundamentally change the equation on the tax of information discovery, which is what we're paying, and the tax of actions.
Okay, that's quite a positive story. Like, we can change. And the other thing you mentioned also in an earlier talk, circular economy or economic change and the current economic challenges we have. Also, it's a challenge on the one hand, but it's also one of the biggest commercial opportunities we have. Can you elaborate a little bit on that one?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we all know that, for instance, the European Parliament is trying to mobilize, I think, a total 1.1 trillion euros for the just transition through the Green Deal. Similar things happening in the US, and regulations are changing, the CBAM coming in. So regulation is driving things and partially funding things. But also about half of all of the biggest stock-listed companies in the world have publicly committed to going net zero over the coming decades. They represent about $26 trillion of annual business that has committed to go net zero and they still don't know how to do it. Some of them have a better idea than others, but many of them need help in doing that. 80% of their footprint tends to be in scope 3, tends to be outside of their own factory walls.
Yeah.
Right. So they need suppliers or outside vendors that help them achieve that net zero. And it's 26
Yeah, so that's
trillion.
also the supply chain thinking, new ways of collaboration, and that's also new economic logic. Yeah.
And this is where you get into systems thinking, right? So before, and the first thing companies do is they look at their own factory or at their own activity. How can we reduce things here? But that's often a very small part of the total impact, the lifetime impact. So you have to start collaborating with your supply chain, but also with people that you've never collaborated with before. And you need to understand where your impact is in that bigger system. So one thing we need to start doing is become more aware of our system level impacts. And I think actually your climate GPT can be brilliant in that, in making the systems impacts of our economic activity more transparent or more clear, so that we can take decisions based on that. At the moment, most people simply don't think that way.
Other companies or organizations that are using it this way already?
Yeah, I mean, it's since we launched at the World Economic Forum in January, and we're about to launch Model 2, and then in this coming January, we'll be doing Model 2.5. And so it's been used from designing climate resilience in the Caribbean by climate scientists, and planting mangrove forests creates hurricane defenses and is a massive sink of CO2 as well as economic activity. So circular thinking in this, all the way through designing climate policy responses for Madagascar, for clothing companies, of redesigning their net zero strategy, and I've just come from a whole set of discussions on this, mapping global risks across supply chains. So we've just, it's been used to map, tens of thousands of locations, and you can see where those climate risks are in supply chains, and then start to redesign that, and hopefully also create more just transition within that. So the usage has surprised us tremendously, and what we're going to do now is we're adding about 150 databases, so numerical databases, to this, together with a set of US universities, and then later on some European universities will add to that. So
the basis is there to use?
The basis is there. It's freely, it's openly available. Anybody can use that. And we've added about 2.5 million additional climate references. So everything the OECD wrote, everything the World Bank's written, World Resources Institute's documents, et cetera, et cetera. So mostly the treaty organizations, those open documentation, their references. So if you ask a question, you can see where it comes from. It helps write everything down to writing a social media campaign for COP29 with the budget, with the timing, in seconds.
There's a question. Bruno.
Gentlemen, I was wondering, what do you think of the importance of the sense of urgency? When we want to change the world, but the world doesn't feel, certain parts do feel the effects of climate change, but the Western part doesn't feel too much effect. I was learned when in the companies I work, when you have to change, you need to replace people. That's part of changing a culture, and I think in a way you said replacing the leaders of the world. But another important factor is when there's no sense of urgency, why do people change? How do you look at that?
Yeah. I don't remember who said this, but I love this saying that the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago, and the second best time is today, right? So I think no one is denying the existence of climate change at the moment, or there might be 1% of people that like to be in the limelight that purposely deny it, but I think there's a widespread awareness about climate change. It is becoming more aware that it has material impact on business. So business leaders, they see it has impact on their operations. Consumers are voting with their money and with their feet. So I think the sense of urgency is growing. The question is, how can we accelerate? How can we turn that awareness into investments that accelerate the transition. And I think there, again, going back to tools like ClimateGTP, making that system's impact more visible is an eye-opener, I think. When you see where in the system impacts are, which stakeholders are involved, it makes it easier to bring them together to come up with collaborative solutions, right? So, yeah, your question, how do we deal with urgency? I think we still need to make it more visible, see where the money is in the system. We still take decisions based on money, very much. A whole industry is developing right now, which is called value investing. So people are looking, or people are studying what is the real value that my activity is creating or destroying for the different stakeholders that I deal with. I believe ABN AMRO actually was one of the front runners in the world in coming out with an impact report, not a sustainability report, an impact report, where they put a number, a monetary number on, this is the amount of money that we're making or destroying for these different stakeholders. Once you start looking that way, it becomes a lot easier to sit down together and start to say, okay, we all agree that climate change is happening. How are we going to fund this?
Yeah, there's another question, but okay.
May I just also add on to what Geert-Jan is saying, because if you look at people under 30, 70+% of them, this is their number one issue. So I think there is a sense of urgency. There's some generational aspects of that, but I just came out of Climate Week, and it's the one thing that we've got two very dangerous wars in the world at the moment, and yet that's the one thing people wanted to talk about was climate change. So given the complexity, I can't imagine that 5 years or even last year or a few years ago, people, given the global risks, this is what people want to talk about. And then it comes back to your point of leadership. We have $100 trillion will be spent on system transition. That's equal more or less to global GDP, so global product for 1 year. This room, and I assume the people watching this, there's a lot of business there. There's a lot of business people. So taking a leadership role and anticipating this is a structural opportunity, the biggest generational opportunity at the scale of 1 times global product is right there for organizations that can and willing to take leadership. And the good news now is these technologies are cheaper than they have been in decades, and in many, many times, they're way cheaper than the legacy technologies there. So not only can you produce and make things for cheaper, closer to its origin, and it still has zero carbon or very low carbon.
Okay, let me get back to the cost issue a little later, but there's another question.
Yeah, I have a question very specific for AI, because I'm a little concerned about the energy consumption of AI.
Okay.
I think the fact that AI might grow exponentially, and exponentially is dangerous if we have models that are not built to that. I'm very curious to get your opinion on how big, is this a big problem, or am I too worried? I'm very curious.
Okay, AI is growing exponentially, and this also has is it a system change in itself, also on an energy level?
So we're quite proud about this. So not only were we the first foundational model and family of models to have been built on climate change, so ClimateGTP, but we were the first AI model, so the first in the Netherlands, the second in Europe after Mistral, which is the French AI company. In this case, we're building a task-specific model. We're the first model that included a sustainability scorecard in the model publication. And we trained it on green power, which was quite a challenge to find sources of green power there. And it's running fully on green power as inference. So not green power nuclear, but green power hydro electric, and then in this case, a mix of solar and wind. If one looks at the data center consumption, energy consumption, which is the deeper question here beyond our specific aspect of that, obviously that is a concern, but one has to see that within context. If you take all of data centers plus all of transportation plus all of airlines, you're still producing less greenhouse gases than fashion. So each of them are around 3%, and fashion is 8 to 9%, depending on how you count it. So, and there is a huge utility to be found in smaller models. So we made a very, very small model with low power, low access that can be, it's open source, people can download it and they can run it on much humbler hardware than before. So I think there's a huge utility, despite the current things that you would read in the debates on small models, energy efficient models. And I think longer term we'll see that we'll be running a lot of these smaller models and energy use will not be exponential at all. And that's what we've seen through other realms of economic activity, absolutely.
Yeah, of course, you're referring also like the growing amount of data centers you see they build around us and whatever. Is quantum computing also, can quantum computing help with reducing this? Then I come to you.
Maybe. Quantum presents a tremendous future, and it's a little bit like fusion, is it 10 years ahead? In the case of fusion, it's always 30 years ahead. And I'll answer it by the fusion response. We have a wonderful fusion reactor. It's right, on a sunny day like today, we just look up at the fusion reactor. We have to do zero of the engineering on safety, on any of those things. It's right there. All we need to do is point a little bit of glass to it, and we get somewhere between 20 and 40% energy coming out of that fusion reactor with none of the risks associated with it. The one thing we have to do is store, and there's plenty of storage avenues to that. So I see quantum can play a role. And increasingly you see early quantum computing available there. What interests us more is far more enabling distributed decisions, many instances of these models running and changing decisions by the thousands, because together we have to change our climate social intelligence. It's not an AI project, it's a social intelligence project. How can we together make smarter climate decisions?
Okay, hopefully it gives you a little bit peace of mind. Geert-Jan, you want to add something?
I really like the question, and maybe not because of how much energy AI is going to be using, but more because this is typically one of these undesired and in some cases unintentional consequences of new technology. And technology is changing so rapidly nowadays, and it's changing more and more and more rapidly, that the unintended consequences can be disastrous. It's 100 years ago, if a train would derail, it would derail at 30 kilometers an hour. You probably survive that. Today, a train derails at 300 kilometers an hour. The same is happening with technology's unintended consequences. You think about the social media. Like, no one would have predicted that you have all the teenage depression happening. And
it was such a nice idea, and now,
right, but and I think we should be very aware that we're heading into a time of unprecedented innovation, because we have to, and it's going to be radical innovation because we have to. So there will be unintended consequences there. So we need to find ways, or structural ways, disciplined ways of thinking about trying to predict some of these unintended consequences. And again, I think AI can help us with that, hopefully. But I think this is a very important thing to put to build into the way we innovate.
Yeah, but that would be a complete other discussion again, how to trust new technologies and how to embed this in our lives. But
I think the phrasing, as an article we're working on, is how to get in time to solve out of time problems. And we're going to have to get really good to be in time for out of time problems.
Yeah. Noted. I have two other questions before we end. You talked about the system change on 3 levels. You can impose taxes and subsidies or whatever. That's basically the weakest level. Then you have another level, and basically end up with changing the mindset. Mm-hmm. What if you can do it at three levels at the same time? Does it happen, or do you need to focus at that? Because then you can say, okay, we have a cost reduction thing. Use the damn data he has, and make an ESG report in 5 seconds.
We downloaded 187,000 ESG reports.
Yeah, so that's
that
a
you can
nice
almost get
base
one
to start
click
with. Yeah.
your own thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
make it easy.
Because they're pretty much all the same. And if you then put your own data set next to it, then you're probably ready. So then that's an incentive. The mindset of people should have also something of, can you grow on a personal level? I would say, because we are organizing a lot of things here as well. People are triggered by not only the economic kind of things, but also, can I grow as a person in my role, or can I improve something else? How can you, do you have, oh.
My mother is calling.
Take it. It's your mama.
That you should take. So if you work on these three levels at the same time, can you do that?
It has to happen. These three levels need to be aligned. What I was trying to say earlier is, you often see these system change efforts derail if it only happens at the parameter level. If you only change taxes or subsidies, and
that's not,
you don't change the mindset, it's sooner or later it's going to go downhill. So it needs to happen at the three levels.
Yeah, and the same thing is, can you help with ClimateGTP on the regulational part of things? I mean, you see so many data. So what kind of effects, what kind of measures you can take, you can derive from your data, isn't it?
Yep.
So you can help governments in imposing the right regulations, I would say. Is that happening? Have you been discussing it in Davos, or?
There's certainly been discussions around using this to facilitate policy making, but also, from the regulation making side and from the compliance side. So, our first goal is to make it very, very easy to comply with regulation. So you're just lowering that threshold, and you're exposing interesting different ways and different solutions that companies, because there's a cost. There are not enough climate experts in Earth to help us make this transition. We're going to have to rely on technology. We're going to have to rely on intelligence. So let's build the best intelligence possible to help with our own transition. And then the next step is it's going to be a mix of incentives as well as regulation. So how can you make that regulation be the smartest possible? And the incentives be the smartest possible, because what we're looking for is, we're going to have the government, because this is what we're talking about, industrial policy, which China has done fantastically effective. I think in much of the West as well as the US, we've kind of forgotten industrial policy. It was a bad word for a while, and now after COVID, the state is back. The state is seen and well understood to be an actor, and the state is understood to be an important actor in this space. And the lessons from industrial policy is very clear. Have the state be an early customer for a product that's not quite finished, and willing to nurture that product, pay a little bit too much for it, and nurture that so that there's a demand for these products, there's a demand for these solutions, and nurture them into larger and larger and larger solutions there. That goes beyond the sort of basic subsidy incentive thing, but it's a very structural way of thinking about this, and we want to help those decisions.
Yeah, you see, on a European level, you see this kind of tendencies that we want to make production regional again, instead of only these longer supply chains to Asia and whatever. So, circular economy forces, or at least supports these kind of developments.
Yeah, I'd love to go back to how we're going to use data to achieve systems change. Right. At the moment, we're very focused on generating data for reporting. What is my CO2 emission, etc. Can we use data to activate the other levels of systems change? How can we generate and use the data for instance, more people being informed and involved in decision making about how we design our systems? Can we use data for people to think more and better about, what paradigms they believe in? What is the type of world that you as an individual or you as a company want to be building? Those are also decisions that need to be informed for you to develop a good idea of that, and data can help there as well.
I mean, just to sorry, Herman, I see the, circularity implies something. It implies you're not standing alone, but like this table, you have neighbors. You're sitting around with neighbors, and so the key insight, I think, in circularity, and this goes back to, Bill McGonagall's work, et cetera, and all of that work, is that you can create industrial ecosystems where waste becomes food. And that's the lesson from nature. Waste is food. And once one does that, the lot of land next to you where they have a waste product there, suddenly that becomes very valuable because where you're situated, and your whole ecology becomes one of how these different parts work together. That means you have to look a little bit broader than your own business and how to situate it. It means you have different decision-making tools to facilitate that. But suddenly your cost balance and the robustness of these ecologies radically change. And we can see this. There are examples. Silicon Valley keeps reinventing itself, keeps redoing itself, because there's something they're doing there that they're doing right. There's lots of things, obviously. It is perfect.
Yeah, and if you think a lot of things through, that's very helpful. There's also all kinds of new. There was a session on new business models around, for example, energy transition. You have your windmills in sea, and there's all kinds of seaweed kind of farming just below. Yeah. Because it works better over there. So there's sort of unintentional new business models that comes around. Yeah. We don't have any time for new questions, and I hope that everybody could follow the thing that was not too abstract, because it's about system change, it's about all kinds of things. Nevertheless, I hope that people enjoyed this conversation. What I learned from it, basically, is pretty positive. If you really want, sometimes system change or changes can be done. Your example, what we did in terms of poverty. If you do it right, then you can change on different levels. But we need to start also on the mindset at the most difficult level. And there is a lot of tools and tricks around that supports these kinds of changes. And circular economy is by, I think, 20, 30 years ago, this was done, or this topic was done a little bit only, by some freaks. By these days, it's core business, and everybody has it. It's essential to many discussions. So hopefully we can have in a couple of years draw the conclusion that we are a little bit further in the developments and some steps ahead. Thank you very much.